sunny side, always on the sunny.
At 2 p.m. on March 29, 1918, Clem and Mary Maluy won a homestead claim on the Colorado High Line near Mac, Colorado, only a few miles from the Utah border. It would take an optimistic eye indeed to see productive farmlands, but these were optimistic times for America, and Clem and Mary began improving the land according to the rules of the Homestead Act. On October 5, 1925, Marilyn May was born with hair so red her mom said that Marilyn's head seemed to be on fire. They lived in a little homestead shack.
The old house had a porch that we had an old ice box in, and ice box on the front porch that we put our stuff in there. But then you went into the kitchen, and the kitchen had a counter with a sink and a pump that we pumped the water out of and the old coal stove. That's what the kitchen amounted to. We used to take our baths in the kitchen once a week in a big old round tin tub.
Moving into the house, and our new house was probably the most wonderful thing that could happen to a family like ours that had lived in a shack so long. That was 12 by 20 building and having no conveniences whatsoever. So we planned this for a long, long time, and us three little girls had hopes of having our own room, which we did. So going in the house was like moving into a mansion, because we had room to run, we had room to play games, we had all kinds of room that we wouldn't have had we not had the opportunity to have this home. And go into my room and look like it was 100 by 100, but it wasn't.
I have to reiterate what she just said, how wonderful it was to go from the old shed shack we lived in into this beautiful home. And like she said, it's like living in a mansion. We ran around, when they finally got the electricity going, ran around turning the lights on and off, and I can remember Phyllis and I putting our clothes in the chest of drawers, what little we brought over, and it was a great experience.
The kitchen floor was tile, it was shiny. The house looked like a house of mirrors or something. It was like a castle. And then we walked into the dining room, and there were those beautiful wooden floors. Everything just shining bright and big. And I was so excited and astonished that, because we hadn't been allowed to go into the house at all.
You are my sunshine, my only sunshine.
Well, he went to school at Loma, Colorado, and I went to grade school in New Liberty, and so we didn't have a chance to meet until we were in the sophomore class. And one day I went on my bicycle. I rode my bicycle to Loma to see my girlfriend, Dolores Smith, which was about 8 miles. And the next day, her and I went for a ride, and the little bridge right west of Loma. And as we were riding our bikes, here comes Chuck and his cousin Bob Pacheco. And we stopped on the bridge and talked, and that's the first time I'd really seen Chuck and visited with him. And he told Bob at that time, he says, you know, she's going to be my wife someday. And he said, she's so sweet. And so time went on, and as we went through school, we started going together when we were sophomores. And when the junior year came, it was time to elect the president of the class and the head girl. And so Chuck says, you're going to be head girl. I said, no, I don't want to be head girl. Yeah, you're going to be head girl. So anyway, I was elected head girl, and he was president of the class, and we had a lot of fun that year doing all of our class duties. And he was also playing football, and then I was also a cheerleader, so I got to go to all the games because we lived about 14 miles from Fruita, and with no transportation, well, I had to stay in Fruita sometimes with my friends to go to the basketball games. But after the games, we went home with our friends. And there were 6 of us that ran around together all the time, and we had during the war, the gas was rationed, so we only had one car, and this boy named Bob Arpke, he always took his car, and that was our transportation to the games. And after the games, we had to stop in Mac, always had to stop in Mac, and wait for the train to come through, the freight train to come through, so that we could wait after the train come home, then it's good too, then we'd go home. But that was always our ritual. So high school was fun, and then Chuck went to we had, well, he's in football in senior year, and then after football, why, he joined the Navy, and that was in October of '42. I remember in high school, why they sounded the alarm that morning in school. And
When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor?
yeah, that was on Sunday, so it was Monday. And they called General Assembly and explained to us that the war had started, that the Japanese had bombed Hawaii.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
When football season was over, he left for the Navy. And at that time is when we became engaged. But there was no time set for the wedding. So he went into the Navy, and then he finished his basic training, and then he had leave to come home. And he was home for about 10 days. And then went on back to San Diego, and there he finished his signal school, and then was assigned to the USS Oakland, which was commissioned at that time.
Now he's on a battleship in his sailor suit. Just a great big sailor man, but he's just as cute. Bell-bottom trousers, coat of navy blue. She loves her sailor, and he loves her too.
Then is when I went to California with Betty Lou, and worked there. And so we went to her mother and father's house in Placerville and stayed a couple of weeks, and then we went to Lake Tahoe and got work in the restaurants. First time I'd ever worked away from home, so it was quite an experience. We worked there. I worked at Bunch's Cafe, which is right on the state line at Lake Tahoe, which is now where Harris Club sits. There was not very many people there at that time because one day we decided to rent a bicycle built for two, and we rode down the highway and met very few cars on the 4th of July. Time has changed so much since then. Now it's all freeways and home. Then he got leave, and he wanted me to come out there then, and after I had been home raising turkeys with Mother, he wanted me to go there and we'd be married. So I went there, got there on a Sunday, and we were married on a Tuesday. He stopped on the steps and had to tie his shoe, and so I said, "Are you scared, Chuck?" And he said, "No, I can hardly wait, but I want to be just perfect." So anyway, then we were at his sister's house, Della's house, and he had me back on the ship in 3 days. So he went back to the ship, and while he was there with me before he went back, he taught me semaphore. And we could see across the bay. So he would stand on the ship, and we'd semaphore back and forth to one another. I was in Vallejo, and he was on Mare Island in the ship. And then he was there. He taught me to read semaphore. And then he shipped out from there and went overseas. And I stayed there and worked at Vallejo in the shipyards.
Rosie, the river keeps a sharp lookout for sabotage.
In the spring of '44, my mother and I decided to raise turkeys. So then I went home and we raised our turkeys, and I went home by train. And all the time he was gone, we wrote letters every other day. I'd write to him, and every third day he'd write to me. And he wrote in his diary how he was always getting, I got a letter from Sweets today. Sweets said this or Sweets said that. And finally one day he said in his diary that, well, I had to burn Sweets' letters today because I had no more room in my locker. So then we raised turkeys, and then he came home on leave in next January in '45, and he was home for 2 weeks. And of course we had a lot of fun seeing all of our old friends in back Colorado. His father, Saul, had a restaurant there, and people came there to dance and drink beer and eat and whatever. And Chuck's mother, Cassandra, was the cook. She cooked wonderful meals for everybody, and everybody knew her and loved her. And while he was there, we all went deer hunting. And in those days, you could just about get as many deer as you wanted. So we came home with a lot of deer, and Mom decided that Chuck's mother decided that we would have a big cookout for all of our friends. And so we butchered the deer and cut it up into steaks, and she cooked lots of steaks. I don't know how many, but a whole big tub full of them. And we had mashed potatoes and gravy, and a wonderful meal she made. And she was a wonderful cook. They invited everybody. I mean, it was just a big night, dancing and music. We had a band come in, and there was dancing and food, and it was really fun. And so he stayed until the end of October, and then he went back to Vallejo, and then I went back after that, and because he had to get this apartment, and then that's when he stayed there and went overseas from there. Charlie had 2 brothers in the service. Benny and Manuel were both in the Navy at the same time he was. Yeah. Manuel was on the Pacific, but Benny was on the Atlantic side of the war. So, but he always wanted to see the brothers, and he did see Manuel. Came one time, the ships were not too far apart, and so they got together on the signal lights, and here comes Manuel across from one boat to the other to see Chuck, and he was in a I guess they call him what they call him.
Oh, boatswain chair, I think.
Something like that. Yeah, they come across on the cable, swinging and going. He was hanging every which way. When he got there, he was so drunk he could hardly stand up, and he had whiskey in each one of his boots for everybody. Chuck was, well, he not only that, he had money in all of his pockets because he did a lot of gambling, so he made out in the Navy. Great.
Dad told me that when Uncle Manuel walked off that ship, he had a roll of $60,000.
Yeah, he did.
Is that true?
Yeah, he did. He was always gambling, and then he stayed until that was in October, and so he stayed until the end of October, and then he went back to Vallejo, and then I went back after that, and because he had to get this apartment, and then that's when he stayed there and went overseas from there. He came back again to San Francisco, and the Navy had apartments for us on Hunters Point, so we had an apartment there while they were there for 10 days, and all his friends would come to our apartment, and we had a lot of fun. Went down to the beach, and we took a lot of pictures, and all his friends were there. We had a good time while he was there, and then he went overseas, and I went to the ship to wave goodbye. I'm telling him goodbye, and then that was very traumatic. All the wives went down to wave goodbye to their husbands, because they had gotten notice that they were to leave the next day, and so we all went down. So then we went back to our apartments to get unpacked and get ready to go home, And here they came back to the apartments. Here come all the husbands back to the apartments because they decided not to leave that day. They'd leave the next day. So that was really a big party that night. And then we had to go through all this again and go to the ship and tell them all goodbye. And it was very sad.
Where was the ship tied up at?
At Hunters Point in San Francisco. And then's when they went overseas until the war was over. And while I was in Oakland working, Oakland had a lot of items in the paper about the ship as it did its duties, and I cut out a lot of clippings from the paper. I have a lot of those, and what they accomplished, everything. And then,
Were you scared for him?
oh yes. And one time, when I was home and we had the turkeys, I told Mother, I said, something good has happened today, or something bad has happened today, because I just cried and cried. And Mother said, well, everything must be all right. Have you heard if there's anything wrong? And come to find out, that was the day that he found out he was coming home. So it was an exciting day.